Get down on the ground right now. Don't move or I'll break your neck. That was the first thing Chief Marcus Reed heard when he stepped out of his car on what should have been the proudest night of his life. Before we begin, I want to know where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel if you believe justice still matters in this country, and please leave a like to help more people see this story, because what happened to this man will shake you to your core. It was a quiet Friday night in Riverton, Tennessee, only a few hours after Marcus Reed had been sworn in as the city's first black police chief. After 20 years in law enforcement, from patrol officer to FBI task force investigator, Marcus had built a reputation for fairness and discipline. He believed in accountability, in doing things the right way, and he believed that if he worked hard enough, one day the badge would mean something. That night, driving home from a small dinner with his wife Angela, Marcus felt proud, humbled, and grateful. He parked in front of his new home, a modest brick house with a flag fluttering in the yard, symbolizing a future he'd worked his whole life to earn. He didn't know that within minutes. Everything he stood for would be turned against him. Marcus stepped out of his car, still wearing his navy dress shirt from the ceremony, his jacket over his arm, his badge tucked inside his pocket. He was on the phone with his son Caleb, laughing about how surreal it felt to finally be the chief, but a neighbor across the street, frightened by the sound of his deep voice, misheard the conversation and called 911. She reported a man shouting outside his home, never mentioning that he was standing in his own driveway. That single call, made out of fear and bias, triggered a nightmare. Within minutes, 3 police cruisers turned onto his street, red and blue lights flashing against the trees. Marcus frowned, confused. As the cars pulled up fast and surrounded his driveway, he held up one hand, calm and steady. "Evening, officers. Is there a problem?" he asked. Captain Rick Dalton stepped out first, a tall, heavy-set man with the kind of authority that had long gone unchecked. He'd been with the department 20 years, but unlike Marcus, he never learned humility. He looked at Marcus with suspicion, one hand on his weapon. "We got a call about a disturbance," Dalton said. "You live here?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. This is my house. I'm Chief Reed. Just transferred in today." Dalton squinted, unimpressed. "Chief Reed, huh? I'll need to see some ID." Marcus reached slowly for his pocket. "It's right here, officer. I'm just going to grab it." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Dalton barked. "Step back, now." 2 other officers joined him, Officer Tyler Briggs, visibly agitated, and a young recruit standing behind them with uncertainty in his eyes. Only one person hesitated, Detective Elena Cruz, the only woman present, who seemed to sense something wasn't right. Marcus tried again. "Listen, I'm not resisting. You can call the station and confirm who I am." Dalton's voice rose with anger. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now!" "There's no need for that," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm cooperating." But before he could finish, Dalton shoved him hard in the chest. Marcus stumbled backward, falling onto the concrete. His head hit the ground with a sharp crack. The young officer gasped. But Dalton didn't stop. He knelt on Marcus's back, pressing down with his full weight, shouting, "Stop resisting! Don't you move!" Marcus coughed, struggling to breathe. "I'm not resisting. I'm Chief Reed, please." But his words only fueled their aggression. Briggs grabbed Marcus's arms, twisting them until the cuffs clicked painfully tight. "You think you can play smart with us?" Briggs snarled. "You people never learn." Elena Cruz tried to intervene. "Captain, he's already cuffed. That's enough." Dalton snapped back. "Stay out of it, detective, or you'll be next." Marcus's vision blurred. He could taste blood in his mouth. The smell of asphalt and sweat filled his lungs as he fought to get a single breath. "I can't breathe," he managed to whisper. Dalton ignored him, pulling a fabric hood from the patrol bag, a spit mask, usually used for violent suspects, and yanked it over Marcus's head. It tightened around his face, cutting off air. "Get him in the car," Dalton ordered. Briggs dragged Marcus across the driveway, his knees scraping the ground. From the doorway, Angela Reed screamed, "Stop! That's my husband! He's the police chief!" But the officers shouted her down, threatening to arrest her too. Neighbors peeked from their windows, some filming, most too afraid to speak. Marcus's body went limp as they shoved him into the back seat of the cruiser. Inside, his chest heaved. "Please," he gasped. "I can't breathe." Dalton slammed the door. "You should have thought of that before running your mouth," he muttered coldly. Elena stood frozen beside the patrol car, trembling. She'd seen many arrests in her career, but never something like this. Never a man so calm treated with such cruelty, and never a superior officer humiliated in his own driveway. She wanted to speak up, but fear chained her silence. Dalton limped slightly as he walked back toward his cruiser, muttering about his ankle. Later, he'd claim Marcus caused that injury, a lie that would become part of the report. In that moment, though, all she saw was arrogance wrapped in authority. As the convoy pulled away, Angela dropped to her knees in the driveway, sobbing into her hands. The sound of the engines faded, leaving only the echo of her voice and the faint flutter of the flag above their porch. Inside the patrol car, Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering the same words over and over, like a prayer, like a warning to a nation that still refused to learn. "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." When Marcus Reed opened his eyes again, the first thing he saw was a white ceiling and the faint pulse of fluorescent lights above him. The air smelled of antiseptic. His throat felt raw, his ribs ached, and his wrists were swollen purple from the cuffs. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he saw Angela sitting beside the hospital bed, her hands clasped, tears streaking her face. "Marcus," she whispered, "they said you attacked them." He blinked, disoriented. "Attacked them? Angela, they're the ones who..." She nodded through her tears. "I know, but they're saying you resisted arrest, that you broke an officer's ankle. They're charging you with assault." Marcus turned his head slowly toward the door, and there they were, Captain Rick Dalton and Lieutenant Brian Hale, standing in their crisp uniforms as if they were visiting a suspect instead of their own chief. Dalton's ankle was wrapped in a brace, but his smirk was intact. Hale, older and slicker, held a clipboard and spoke in that rehearsed bureaucratic tone Marcus had heard too many times before. "Chief Reed, or should I say, Mr. Reed," Hale began. "We're here to inform you of the formal charges: disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and assault on a law enforcement officer." Marcus tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "You attacked me in my own driveway, while I was unarmed, and now you're writing me up like a criminal?" Dalton leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You can spin it any way you want, Reed, but we've got reports, we've got statements, and we've got a busted ankle. That's all the public's gonna hear." Angela shot up from her chair. "He's the police chief, for God's sake." Dalton's smile barely moved. "Not anymore. Ma'am, the mayor's already been notified. Until this is resolved, he's suspended pending investigation." She looked at her husband, speechless, her hands trembling. Marcus stared at the two men, his voice low but steady. "You're not just lying. You're fabricating an entire crime to cover your own brutality." Dalton shrugged. "Believe whatever helps you sleep, Chief." Then he turned and limped out of the room, leaving Hale to do the rest of the talking. Hale adjusted his tie. "Internal review will handle this properly," he said. "In the meantime, I recommend you cooperate. The department has a reputation to protect." He said the last words as if they were sacred. Marcus knew that tone. He'd heard it his whole career. the smooth language of cover-ups, the practiced calm of men who'd done this before. When they left, Angela turned to him, her voice breaking. "Marcus, what are we going to do?" He took her hand gently. "We're going to tell the truth. That's what we've always done." She nodded, but fear lingered in her eyes. 2 hours later, a nurse walked in carrying paperwork for Marcus to sign. As she left, she leaned closer and whispered, "You should know. Detective Cruz stopped by. She said to check your email. She didn't want anyone to see her." Marcus's pulse quickened. He reached for his phone from the nightstand. In his inbox was a single message with no subject, from an unknown address. He opened it. There was a video file attached. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. His driveway, the flashing lights, the shouting. It was all there. The shove, the fall, the knee pressed against his back, his own voice crying out. "I can't breathe." Marcus exhaled sharply. There it was. Proof that he wasn't insane. Proof that what they did to him wasn't a misunderstanding. It was brutality. Angela covered her mouth as she watched, tears streaming down. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They're monsters." The next morning, Dalton filed his official report. It read like a script. Subject was combative, refused commands, assumed a fighting stance, and caused injury to an officer during the struggle. Hale signed off as witness. The department's press release was even worse. It painted Marcus as an intoxicated man who resisted lawful arrest after a domestic disturbance. Local news picked it up by noon, running the headline, "Riverton Police Chief Suspended After Violent Altercation." The story spread fast. Online comments poured in, some shocked, many hateful. Marcus lay in his hospital bed watching the coverage. His name dragged through the mud. The irony cut deep. He had spent his entire career defending the integrity of law enforcement, and now the system he believed in was destroying him. Meanwhile, inside the station, Elena Cruz was in quiet panic. She knew Dalton and Hale were rewriting reports, deleting footage, and replacing it with their own evidence. She had seen it before, complaints disappearing, files marked confidential, body cam logs wiped clean. This time, though, it was different. It was their own chief. Elena sat alone in her car in the parking lot, gripping the USB drive in her pocket. It contained the unedited footage from the dash camera that night. She had downloaded it before Dalton's tech team could erase it. Her hands trembled as she whispered to herself, "If I hand this over, I'm done. If I don't, he's finished." At the same time, Angela called the family attorney, but even he sounded uncertain. "Angela, this is delicate. The department's already locked down their statements. Without evidence, it's your word against theirs." She looked toward Marcus, who lay quietly, eyes open, mind racing. "We have evidence," she said firmly. "We just need to get it out." Later that day, Hale met with the mayor behind closed doors. The mayor, Jonathan Price, was a seasoned politician, more concerned about headlines than truth. Hale reassured him that everything was under control, that the incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding, and that the department was handling it internally. Price nodded, signing the temporary suspension order for Marcus Reed without hesitation. The machine had already started turning. By sunset, Marcus was discharged from the hospital with bruised ribs, a concussion, and a storm of thoughts. He refused an ambulance escort home. As he stepped into the front yard, the place where he was beaten, he felt a wave of quiet rage, not just at the men who hurt him, but at the entire system that allowed it to happen. Neighbors peeked through their curtains again, whispering. Someone across the street had recorded the attack, but fear kept them silent. That night, Marcus sat at his desk replaying the video Elena had sent. Each frame was a punch to his soul. He paused at the moment Dalton shoved him. Zooming in on the face twisted with hate, he knew men like that. He'd trained them, disciplined them, even believed some could change. But this was different. Dalton wasn't a bad apple. He was the proof of a rotten tree. Angela stood behind him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You can't fight them alone," she said softly. "They'll bury you." Marcus looked up at her, eyes filled with quiet resolve. "Then we'll dig our way out." While the city slept, somewhere across town, Elena Cruz made her decision. She walked into a small diner after midnight, ordered a black coffee, and slipped the USB drive into an envelope addressed to a journalist she trusted, James Walker, from the Riverton Chronicle. She didn't write a note. She didn't need to. The truth was inside, back at the Reed home. Marcus stared out the window, the glow of streetlights reflecting off his bandaged face. The badge that once symbolized honor now lay on the table beside him, stained with dried blood. He whispered to himself, "They think they ended me tonight. But this is just the beginning." The morning the video leaked, Riverton woke up to chaos. It started quietly, with a headline on a small independent site. "Footage shows police assault on suspended chief." Within an hour, it was everywhere. The video showed Marcus Reed face down in his own driveway, handcuffed, pleading for air while officers shouted, "Stop resisting!" It showed Captain Rick Dalton slamming his knee into Marcus's back, and the sickening sound of a body hitting concrete. It showed blood, confusion, and a man gasping, "I can't breathe," until his voice broke. There were no cuts, no edits, just raw truth. And in a world hungry for outrage, truth spreads faster than fire. By noon, the clip had more than 3 million views on social media. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for Chief Reed and hashtag Riverton Truth trended across the country. The public didn't know all the details yet, but they knew what they saw: a black man in pain, a badge ignored, and officers behaving like executioners instead of protectors. People flooded the department's Facebook page with anger. Some demanded firings, others called it attempted murder, but inside the Riverton Police Department, silence was the order of the day. In a closed meeting on the second floor, Lieutenant Brian Hale slammed his fist on the table. "Who leaked it?" he barked. Dalton sat back in his chair, pale but furious. "It had to be someone from tech or that damn detective. Cruz has been acting strange." Hale rubbed his temples. "If that video keeps spreading, we're done. The mayor's office already called twice. They want answers." Dalton sneered. "Answers? I'll give them answers. That man was resisting. He caused his own injuries. You think the public understands what it's like to deal with drunks and liars every day?" Hale looked at him coldly. "Drop the attitude. Rick, this isn't a locker room story. This is a scandal." At that exact hour, in a small newsroom downtown, James Walker sat at his desk, phone buzzing non-stop. Walker was known for exposing corruption. And this was gold. He hadn't expected the package that arrived that morning. No name, no return address. Just a USB drive labeled Truth when he played the footage. His stomach turned. He'd covered brutality cases before. But this one was different. The victim wasn't a civilian. It was the city's own police chief. Walker knew that if he posted it, he'd be going up against powerful people. But he also knew he couldn't stay silent. He made a few calls to confirm timestamps, badges, and patrol logs. Everything checked out. It was real. He uploaded the story at 8:42 in the morning under the title, "Exclusive, Chief Reed assaulted by his own officers, department silent." Within minutes, the server crashed from traffic. National outlets picked it up by noon. Cable networks ran split screens showing the footage on one side and official statements on the other. The difference was night and day, the truth and the lie, side by side. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his living room, bandages still on his ribs, watching the chaos unfold. Angela stood beside him, holding his hand. "It's out," she whispered. "They can't hide anymore." Marcus nodded, eyes fixed on the television. His face looked haunted, not just by pain, but by recognition. He'd spent 2 decades defending a system that was now devouring itself. "They won't stop with lies," he said softly. "They'll try to discredit me next." Angela turned toward him. "Then we fight." By afternoon, crowds began forming outside the Riverton Police Department. Protesters carried signs reading, "We can't breathe," and "Accountability now." The mayor called an emergency press conference, sweating under the lights. "We are aware of the video," Mayor Price said stiffly, "and an internal investigation is underway." Reporters shouted over each other. "Mayor, is it true the victim is your own police chief? Why hasn't anyone been arrested? Did the department falsify reports?" Price stumbled through his answers, muttering about procedures and patience, but patience was not what people wanted. They wanted justice, inside the department. Tensions split the ranks. Some officers whispered that Dalton had gone too far. Others defended him, saying Marcus had provoked it. Elena Cruz sat alone in her office, heart pounding every time her phone buzzed. She knew she'd be blamed once they traced the leak. When Hale barged in, she looked up calmly. "You did it, didn't you?" he said. "You sent the video." Elena met his gaze. "If I did, it's because someone had to. We're supposed to protect the truth, not bury it." Hale's face flushed red. "You just destroyed your career." She stood, voice steady. "Then I'll rebuild it on something real." By evening, the department's statement went public. It was short and defensive. The use of force was consistent with training and policy. That single sentence poured gasoline on the fire. On television, commentators dissected every frame of the footage. Civil rights attorneys called it one of the clearest cases of police misconduct in recent history. By nightfall, protests spread to Nashville and Memphis. News anchors repeated one chilling line from the video, "I can't breathe." The country had heard those words before, but this time they came from someone who wore the badge himself. That night, Hale and Dalton met privately at Hale's house. Dalton was drinking heavily, his brace tossed aside. "It's her," he said. "That damn Cruz leaked it. We've got to handle this." Hale's eyes narrowed. "You've done enough handling for one lifetime. If this investigation digs deeper, it'll uncover every complaint you've ever buried." Dalton glared. "I took orders. Don't act innocent." The room went silent for a long moment. Hale exhaled, his voice low. "We'll spin it. Say it's taken out of context. Say the chief was under the influence. The public forgets fast." Dalton grunted. "You think he'll stay quiet? He's not just some random guy." Hale leaned forward. "He's a broken man. He'll stay quiet." But Marcus wasn't quiet. That same night, he recorded a short video statement from his living room. The lighting was dim, his face bruised, his voice calm but powerful. "I served this country in uniform for 20 years, he said. "I trained officers to protect life, not destroy it. What you saw in that video wasn't policing. It was hate wearing a badge. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone." The video went viral instantly, reaching millions within hours. Comments flooded in, some supportive, some racist, some filled with disbelief. But the tone of the nation had changed. The image of a bloodied police chief begging for breath was burned into America's memory. By midnight, the FBI announced it was reviewing the case. The state attorney general issued a statement promising an independent inquiry. Hale panicked. Dalton ranted. The mayor's phone never stopped ringing. Meanwhile, Marcus sat by the window, watching the flashing lights of patrol cars passing by. Angela brought him a glass of water. "You just started something bigger than this city," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "It's not about me anymore. It's about what comes next." Across town, in that same quiet diner where Elena once sat, James Walker typed his next article. The title was simple: "The Chief Who Couldn't Breathe." It would reach 20 million readers in a week, and for the first time in Riverton's history, the truth had a chance to win. 3 days after the video exploded across America, Riverton was no longer the same. Protesters filled the streets from sunrise to midnight, carrying signs, chanting Marcus Reed's name, demanding arrests. News vans lined the City Hall parking lot, and the once quiet police headquarters looked like a fortress surrounded by cameras and questions. Inside, chaos reigned. Officers whispered in corners, captains called for emergency briefings, and Mayor Jonathan Price was losing control. Pressure from Washington had arrived. The Department of Justice wanted answers, and the governor's office wanted calm. That morning, under a pale gray sky, Marcus Reed walked through the station doors for the first time since the attack. The hallway fell silent. Every pair of eyes followed him. Some lowered their gaze in shame, others in fear. He was wearing his uniform again, his badge freshly polished, his expression steady but unreadable. Bruises still marked his face, but his presence carried something heavier, authority reclaimed. Lieutenant Hale rose from his chair as Marcus entered the conference room. "Chief Reed," he said stiffly, "you shouldn't be here. You're still under suspension." Marcus stepped closer, voice low and deliberate. "Then I'll lift it myself. I'm still your chief, and it's time we face what this department has become." Hale glanced toward the mayor, who stood near the door sweating, avoiding eye contact. "We can't just—" "We can," Marcus interrupted, "and we will, because this ends today." He turned toward the gathered officers, some standing, some seated, all waiting to see what he'd do. His voice filled the room, calm but cutting through the tension like glass. "I wore this badge for 20 years believing it stood for integrity. But what I saw in that video wasn't integrity. It was cowardice. It was cruelty. And it happened under this roof. Not by strangers. By our own." A murmur swept the room. Dalton wasn't there. He was home on administrative leave, hiding from the cameras. Hale shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued. "The public thinks this department can't be fixed. They think we're broken beyond repair. I'm not here to defend what happened. I'm here to rebuild what's left." He laid a folder on the table, a thick binder labeled Task Force Honor. "Effective immediately. I'm establishing an independent internal unit," he said. "Every use of force case from the last 3 years will be re-examined. Every deleted report, every missing file, every false statement will be uncovered." Someone in the back scoffed. "Chief, that's impossible. The union won't allow it." Marcus turned, eyes sharp. "Then they can fight me in the light of day, because we're done operating in the dark." The silence that followed was long and heavy, for the first time. Even the skeptics knew this wasn't a man speaking from anger. It was conviction. Across town, in a quiet newsroom. James Walker was watching the live stream from his office. He leaned back, smiling faintly. "He's doing it," he muttered. Elena Cruz stood beside him, still nervous but determined. "He won't be safe," she said softly. "Dalton has friends in every unit. They'll come after him." James shook his head. "He's not the one hiding anymore. They are." That same afternoon, Marcus met privately with Mayor Price and the city attorney. The mayor was pale, his voice trembling. "Marcus, listen to me. The state is breathing down my neck. The governor's calling for calm. You can't just take control of this investigation on your own. Marcus leaned forward across the table. You're right, Jonathan. You can't. But I can. Because I'm the one who almost died in that driveway while you were sleeping comfortably in yours. The mayor swallowed hard, saying nothing. Marcus continued, his voice steady but fierce. You didn't hire me to stay quiet. You hired me to clean this up. So either you stand with me, or you'll be standing in front of the same cameras explaining why you didn't. By the end of the day, Task Force Honor became official. Marcus brought in outside investigators, retired judges, civil rights attorneys, and forensic experts, people with no ties to Riverton politics. The department's servers were seized. Records were pulled from archives. For years, complaints that had been ignored suddenly resurfaced. Dalton's name appeared in 7 excessive force reports, each dismissed under insufficient evidence. Hale's signature was on all of them. The pattern was clear, and this time it couldn't be buried. Meanwhile, Dalton was spiraling. His arrogance was replaced by paranoia. He called Hale repeatedly, leaving voicemails filled with panic. They're digging through everything. Brian, they're gonna find it all. Hale didn't respond. He knew the walls were closing in that night. Dalton stormed into the precinct, drunk, shouting that he'd been betrayed. Marcus was still in his office when he heard the commotion. He stepped out to see Dalton stumbling through the lobby, shouting curses, demanding his badge back. Officers froze. Marcus walked slowly toward him. Rick, he said evenly, go home. Dalton pointed a trembling finger at him. You think you're a hero now? You think they'll love you for this? You're just another headline waiting to fade. Marcus didn't flinch. Maybe, but at least I'll fade on the right side of history. Dalton's face twisted in rage, but he said nothing more. 2 officers escorted him out as cameras from the hallway captured every second. That night, Marcus met privately with Elena Cruz in his office. You risked your career for me, he said quietly. I won't forget that. She nodded. You don't owe me anything, Chief. I just did what we're supposed to do. He smiled faintly. Then maybe you're the future of this department. She hesitated before speaking again. Chief, I found something. It's about Hale. There's an encrypted folder on the internal drive. Personnel files he shouldn't have access to. It's labeled Operation Shield. Marcus frowned. What's in it? I don't know, she said. But my guess. It's a list of protected officers, the ones Internal Affairs never touched. Marcus spent the next hour going through the files. Names, dates, redacted reports. It was a map of corruption that stretched far beyond Riverton. Officers across the state had been protected under Hale's oversight. Their misconduct quietly erased in exchange for loyalty. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just one bad night. It was a system built to protect itself. The following morning, Marcus held a press conference outside City Hall. Cameras flashed, the air thick with tension. He stepped up to the podium, Angela by his side, Elena standing in the crowd behind him. You've seen the video, he began. You've read the statements. You've heard the lies. But today, we start something new. Riverton will no longer hide behind excuses. We are launching a full investigation, not just into one night, but into the culture that allowed it. Reporters shouted questions. But Marcus spoke over them, his voice commanding, no one is above accountability, not even me. In living rooms across the country, people watched in silence. Some cried, others cheered. The image of a wounded man standing tall against his own department struck something deep. A rare glimpse of courage in a world jaded by injustice inside the department. Hale watched from his office, sweat gathering at his temples. He knew what was coming. By the end of the week, subpoenas would land on his desk, Dalton would be arrested, and the city that once tried to bury the truth would have no choice but to face it. That night. As Marcus walked through the quiet halls of the station, he paused in front of the mirror where his badge reflected faintly in the dim light. He thought of all the years he'd spent teaching younger officers about integrity, about the sacred duty of service. Now, he realized, those words meant more than ever. He wasn't fighting for a title anymore. He was fighting for the soul of the badge itself. And as he turned off the light and stepped into the night air, he whispered a promise only he could hear. No more hiding, no more silence, not ever again. By the time the trial began, the world had already chosen a side. Outside the Riverton County Courthouse, hundreds gathered behind metal barricades, holding posters of Marcus Reed's battered face beside the words, "Justice for the Chief." Reporters crowded the steps, shouting questions into microphones as police officers, lawyers, and witnesses slipped through the doors. Inside, the air was heavy, every seat filled, every camera pointed toward the front. Captain Rick Dalton sat at the defense table, jaw tight, wearing the same defiant expression he'd carried since the night of the assault. He had lost the uniform, the pension, the respect of his peers, but not the arrogance that had brought him there. Next to him sat his attorney, a fast-talking man from Nashville who claimed Dalton had been the victim of public hysteria across the room. Marcus Reed took his seat beside the prosecutor. His body still bore faint scars, but his posture was steady, composed, unbroken. Angela sat a few rows behind him, her hand clutching the silver cross around her neck, eyes locked on the man who had nearly killed her husband. The state's attorney, Lisa Gardner, stood first, walking toward the jury with quiet precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case is not about a single mistake. It's about a man who abused his power, who attacked his own chief, and who thought his badge would protect him from the truth." She pointed to the screen as the lights dimmed. "You'll see the video for yourselves. You'll hear the words he used. You'll feel the fear of a man begging for air while the very people sworn to protect him stood above him with contempt." Then she pressed play. The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's voice echoing through the speakers. "I can't breathe. Please. I can't breathe." The jurors shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others staring in disbelief. Dalton's lawyer tried to object, claiming the footage was prejudicial, but the judge, a stern woman named Evelyn Porter, overruled him without hesitation. When the video ended, Marcus was called to the stand. He walked slowly, every step deliberate. The prosecutor asked him to describe that night, and though his tone was calm, every word carried weight. "I was coming home from a long day. I'd been sworn in as chief just hours earlier. I was on the phone with my son when I saw the patrol cars pull up. I introduced myself. I told them who I was. But they didn't see me as a chief. They didn't see me as an officer. They saw a black man they didn't trust." He paused, letting the silence sink in. "They told me to turn around. I did. And then I was slammed onto the concrete. I remember hearing something crack. I remember tasting blood. I remember trying to say I couldn't breathe." The courtroom was still. Even the defense attorney looked uneasy. Angela closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. Dalton's attorney rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. "Chief Reed, isn't it true that you raised your voice and refused to comply?" Marcus met his eyes. "I raised my voice to tell them I was suffocating. But you admit you were emotional? Wouldn't you be?" The lawyer hesitated. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I didn't resist. I didn't fight. The only thing I fought for that night was air." The jurors nodded subtly, the weight of his words unmistakable. Next came Elena Cruz. She recounted how she'd witnessed the assault, how Dalton ignored her warnings, and how she later found the deleted footage on the department servers. The defense tried to discredit her, calling her a disgruntled officer seeking attention. But Elena's composure never broke. "I didn't leak the video for attention," she said firmly. "I leaked it because if I didn't, no one would have believed him." Her testimony was followed by Dr. Rachel Monroe, the forensic pathologist who examined Marcus afterward. "The injuries," she said, "were consistent with blunt force trauma, not with falling or accidental contact. He had bruising across the back, wrist lacerations from overly tight cuffs, and restricted airflow from the hood placed over his head. It was excessive, dangerous, and unjustified." When it was Dalton's turn to testify, the courtroom braced for theater. He walked to the stand in a gray suit, posture rigid. "I did my job," he said flatly. "The suspect." "The suspect?" the prosecutor interrupted. "You mean your police chief?" Dalton's eyes flickered. "He wasn't acting like one. He was aggressive, shouting. I followed procedure." Gardner leaned closer. "Procedure? Does procedure include lying in your report? Claiming he broke your ankle when you admitted on tape you twisted it yourself?" Dalton's jaw clenched. "The recording was played. We all just landed on my ankle the wrong way." The words echoed through the room like a confession. "Did you say that, Captain Dalton?" Gardner asked. Dalton hesitated, then muttered, "Yes." "Then why did you charge him with assault?" Silence. "Because it looked bad," he finally said. The crowd gasped. The judge banged her gavel for order, but the damage was done. Over the following days, witness after witness took the stand. Fellow officers, medical experts, even neighbors who had seen the flashing lights that night. The picture was clear. Dalton had acted out of prejudice and rage, and Hale had covered it up to protect the department. When Hale himself testified, he tried to claim ignorance, insisting he trusted his men. But when confronted with the files labeled Operation Shield, he stammered. The prosecutor asked one final question. "Lieutenant Hale, how many officers did you protect under that program?" He stared down at the table. "Too many," he whispered. The closing arguments were devastating. The prosecutor spoke with quiet conviction. "Power is not a license to harm. The badge is not armor against truth. If we let this go, if we excuse what you've seen, then justice means nothing." Dalton's attorney countered weakly, claiming his client was being sacrificed to public outrage. But the words fell flat. The jurors had seen the truth with their own eyes, on the final day. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, the air felt electric. Marcus sat with his hands clasped, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Angela whispered a prayer. The judge asked the foreman for the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Richard Dalton, guilty on all counts." The room erupted. Gasps, tears, even applause. Dalton's face turned gray. Hale's hands shook. The judge restored order, her voice firm. "Captain Dalton, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for assault under color of law, obstruction of justice, and falsifying official reports. Lieutenant Hale, you are stripped of rank and benefits and remanded for further investigation." The gavel struck. And just like that, the room exhaled as the crowd dispersed. Marcus stood quietly. He didn't smile, didn't raise his fists. He simply looked toward Angela, who mouthed, "It's over." But deep down, Marcus knew it wasn't. This wasn't victory. It was accountability. He approached the press outside, the microphones crowding around him. "Justice," he said softly, "is not about revenge. It's about truth. And the truth is, no uniform should ever protect corruption." His words echoed through the square as the crowd cheered, not just for a man who survived, but for a country still learning what justice means. That night, as he walked home beneath the same sky where it all began, Marcus Reed looked up and whispered a promise to himself. This would never happen again. Not under his watch. Not in his city. Not ever. In the weeks after the verdict, Riverton began to change. The anger that had once filled its streets slowly turned into purpose. The department that once stood for silence now faced the echo of truth in every hallway. Marcus Reed was reinstated as chief by unanimous vote of the city council, this time with a mandate that extended far beyond Riverton. He didn't return to celebrate or to gloat. He returned to rebuild, his first morning back. He walked through the station doors that had once felt cold and foreign. Now, every officer he passed stood up straight, some nodding, some unable to meet his eyes. He said nothing, only nodded back. The weight of reform had already begun. Within days, Marcus launched the most ambitious transformation in the city's history. Project Honor, backed by the State Attorney General and a $60 million grant from the Department of Justice. It was more than a program. It was a promise. Every officer, from rookies to captains, would undergo mandatory ethics and bias training. Every squad car would be equipped with a body camera that couldn't be disabled. Disciplinary files would no longer vanish into sealed folders, and for the first time in the department's century-long history, a civilian oversight board, composed of local teachers, veterans, and pastors, was given the power to review complaints directly. The city watched in cautious disbelief. Many doubted it could work. But Marcus didn't measure success by quick applause. He measured it by culture. He spent nights reading through reports that had been ignored for years, calling victims personally to tell them their cases were being reopened. One afternoon, he called the family of a young man who had been beaten in custody in 2018. "This time," Marcus said quietly, "we'll finish what was started." The woman on the other end cried, for her. Justice wasn't just overdue, it was almost forgotten. Within months, Riverton became a case study for transformation. CNN aired a feature titled, "The City That Rebuilt Trust." The DOJ cited Riverton as a model of reform. Officers began volunteering for community patrols unarmed, meeting residents face to face. The tone of policing shifted from control to connection. The same community that once shouted in protest now stood alongside officers at town events. People began to believe again, not in perfection, but in progress. Marcus called it the long fix inside the department. Change wasn't easy. Many veterans resisted. "You're turning us into social workers." One sergeant grumbled during training. Marcus looked at him and said, "Maybe that's exactly what we should have been all along." Slowly, the old walls began to fall. Elena Cruz was promoted to captain, becoming the first Latina woman to lead internal investigations in Riverton's history. The officers, once afraid to speak up, began reporting misconduct without fear. The culture of silence was cracking, replaced by something stronger: accountability. Mayor Price, who had once wavered under pressure, became one of Marcus's staunchest supporters. Together, they pushed through the Community Justice Act, ensuring independent audits of every police department in the state. The mayor stood at a podium one afternoon, admitting publicly, "We failed him, and through that failure, we failed this city. But he chose to rebuild instead of destroy, and we will never forget that." Behind him, Marcus stood quietly, his expression humble but resolute. Meanwhile, the people responsible for the darkness faced their own consequences. Rick Dalton began serving his sentence at a federal prison in Kentucky. He filed appeals that went nowhere. Letters from former colleagues stopped coming, alone and bitter. He was just another inmate stripped of power. Brian Hale, under investigation for obstruction and tampering, lost everything: his pension, his reputation, his voice in the community. When a reporter asked Marcus if he felt vindicated, he simply said, "No one wins in a story like this. We just stop losing." Outside the city, Project Honor began spreading. Departments from Memphis, Atlanta, and even Los Angeles reached out to learn from Riverton's blueprint. Training manuals carried Marcus's words on the opening page. Integrity is not what you do when the camera is off. It's what you refuse to do when the camera is on. The phrase became a rallying cry for reformers nationwide. At home, life had changed too. Angela Reed's Breathe Again. Foundation grew faster than anyone expected, offering trauma counseling for families affected by police violence. She traveled across the country speaking at conferences, always ending her talks the same way. My husband fought for his breath so others wouldn't have to. Marcus often watched her speak from the crowd, proud yet pained, knowing the cost of their journey. Despite progress, Marcus carried quiet scars, some nights. He still woke in the dark, hearing the echo of those words, "Stop resisting." But instead of bitterness, he turned it into purpose. He spent evenings mentoring young recruits, teaching them what the academy never had. "When you pull that uniform on," he told them, "you don't just wear authority, you wear trust. Don't break it, because one day, you might need it to save you." A year after his reinstatement, Riverton Police hosted its first open-door graduation ceremony. Families filled the courtyard. Music played softly, and the recruits stood proudly under the banner that read, "Honor Before Power." Marcus gave the keynote speech, his voice, deep and calm, carried across the crowd. "A badge doesn't make you brave. Compassion does. Justice does. We lost our way once, but we found it again through truth. And if we ever forget that, we don't deserve this uniform." The audience rose in applause, some in tears. Later that night, standing alone in his office, Marcus looked out over the city skyline glowing beneath the stars. He thought of how far they had come and how fragile progress could be. Justice, he knew, wasn't a destination. It was a decision made every single day. And as the clock ticked past midnight, he whispered the same words that had guided him through the storm. "We breathe again, not because they let us, but because we refused to stop." 1 year later, Riverton no longer looked like the city Marcus Reed had inherited. The protests were gone, replaced by murals painted across downtown walls, one of them showing Marcus, not as a victim, but as a man standing tall, holding his badge high beneath the words, "Truth lives here." Crime was down, trust was rising, and the same residents who once crossed the street to avoid the police now stopped to shake their hands. The Riverton Police Academy had been renamed the Angela and Marcus Reed Training Center, dedicated to justice, accountability, and empathy. Recruits learned not just procedure, but humanity. The city that once nearly broke under the weight of corruption was breathing again, steady and strong. Marcus walked those halls often, speaking to new cadets with quiet authority. "Remember," he would tell them, "it's not your badge that earns respect. It's how you treat people when no one's watching." Those words had become a mantra printed above every classroom door. Across the nation, the ripple effect of Riverton's transformation continued to spread. Over 24 police departments had adopted variations of Project Honor. Now overseen by a federal task force, the Department of Justice cited Marcus's leadership as a model for national reform. Universities began teaching his case as part of criminal justice courses, not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. In Washington, a new bill called the Reed Act gained bipartisan support, aimed at mandating national body camera standards and civilian review boards. For once, both sides of the aisle agreed on something born from truth, but Marcus never sought the spotlight. He remained grounded, still living in the same modest house where everything began, the same driveway where his blood once stained the concrete. He never paved over that stain. He let the rain wash it away naturally, calling it his reminder. Every morning, before leaving for work. He paused there for a moment, breathing deeply, as if reclaiming the space with each sunrise. Angela often watched from the window, knowing that no matter how far they had come, the memory of that night would never truly leave him. Yet, it didn't haunt him anymore. It fueled him. That spring, the city held a memorial event marking 1 year since the trial. The park was filled with families, officers, and community leaders. Marcus stood at the podium, dressed in his uniform, but his tone was personal, almost reflective. "A year ago," he began, "this city was broken, and so was I. We had every reason to give up on each other, but we didn't. We chose something harder. We chose to rebuild." His voice carried over the crowd, strong and steady. "What happened in that driveway will never leave me. But it also taught me something. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let hate have the last word." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Angela, standing in the front row, wiped a tear from her cheek as he continued. "Riverton didn't change because of me. It changed because good people refused to stay silent. Officers like Captain Cruz, doctors like Rachel Monroe, journalists like James Walker. They proved that truth can survive anything if we protect it." The crowd erupted in applause, and for the first time in months, Marcus smiled fully. After the ceremony, Elena Cruz approached him. She had become one of the most respected officers in the state, now leading her own division dedicated to ethics enforcement. "Chief," she said, smiling, "you ever think we'd get here?" He chuckled softly. "Not for a second, but I'm glad we didn't give up trying." She looked out at the crowd of recruits mingling with families, children laughing, and banners reading "Honor Before Power." "You know," she said, "they'll study you for decades." Marcus shook his head gently. "Then I hope they study the people who stood beside me. One man doesn't change a system. People do." Meanwhile, James Walker, the journalist who exposed the story, won the Pulitzer Prize for The Chief Who Couldn't Breathe. In his acceptance speech, he said, "I didn't write that story to make headlines. I wrote it because one man's truth forced all of us to see who we really are." His words went viral, echoing the same sentiment that Marcus had lived by, that justice begins where fear ends. As for Dalton and Hale, their names faded into obscurity. Dalton, serving time quietly in a federal facility, had sent a letter months earlier. Marcus never showed it to anyone, but Angela once saw the envelope sitting on his desk. When she asked what it said, he replied simply, "He finally said sorry." She nodded, understanding that some things didn't need to be shared. Marcus didn't hate Dalton anymore. He pitied him, not for the years he lost, but for the humanity he'd thrown away long before the trial. That summer, Riverton hosted its first Community Unity Parade, led by officers, students, and local activists marching side by side. Marcus and Angela walked hand in hand at the front, smiling at faces they once only saw through fear. As they reached City Hall, Angela whispered, "Do you ever think about leaving this all behind?" Marcus looked at her softly. "I think about what would have happened if I hadn't survived that night," he said. "And then I think about this. About them." He nodded toward the crowd, diverse, joyful, unafraid. "No, this is where I belong." As the sun set, the parade lights reflected off the polished badge on his chest. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was memory, sacrifice, and renewal. Marcus knew that history would remember him not for what he suffered, but for how he responded. His legacy wasn't built in that courtroom or through laws that bore his name. It lived in every officer who stopped to listen instead of shout, in every child who grew up unafraid of flashing lights, in every citizen who now believed again in the possibility of good men wearing blue. That night, standing on his porch, the city quiet again. Marcus looked out over Riverton's skyline, peaceful, alive, breathing. He whispered the same words that had carried him through pain, trial, and redemption. We can't change the past, but we can build something better from it. And as the wind rustled the flag above him, the man who once couldn't breathe smiled, knowing the world finally could. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes in justice. Your voice keeps these stories alive, and together, we make sure the truth is never silenced.